Hello, and welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, and I've been the creative director and host of this podcast since we came up with this idea almost 6 years ago exactly. We've had some wonderful interviews so far on our What's Your Spiritual Story series, and on this edition, I'm honored to say Jerry interviews me. I hesitated when he first asked me because I didn't think I could offer anything new. Maybe I haven't. But looking from the beginning at my life's path and examining my journey with God has been heart-opening for me, and I'm very grateful. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, welcome, Scott Langdon. I see you often because we work together on the God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher podcast, and periodically we do What's on Our Minds, where we share what's on our minds, what thoughts are going through our heads, especially with regard to some recent episodes that we've aired. And I know people, I've certainly heard, and our listeners have heard parts of your spiritual story, just as they come up serendipity and conversation around this or that topic. But we've never heard your story as a lifelong story, your own pilgrim's progress, you might say, where you started and where you went next and where you went next. And so let's start with where you grew up. Let's get the location established. Where did you grow up?
Start at the very beginning, huh?
Yeah, we start at the beginning.
A very good place to start, they say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was born in Media, Pennsylvania, in the Media Hospital. When my parents were living in Essington, Pennsylvania, which is right by the Philadelphia airport, right along the Delaware River there as it starts to stretch out from east to west. And I was born there, and we lived there in Essington, in that area. And my mom grew up in the house that she was born in.
Oh, really?
And when my dad was 4, his family moved across the street from my mom, and he grew up in that house. And my maternal grandparents, still lived in the same house all the way through the rest of their lives. And when I was in 2nd grade, we moved into the house that my dad grew up in. So my dad and mom moved us into that house. And so I lived across the street from my grandparents and in the house that my dad grew up in for a couple of years before we moved into South Jersey, which would be my middle school, later elementary, middle school, and then high school years. But the beginning of my spiritual story really begins there in Essington at St. John's Lutheran Church. It was where my mother was christened, my father was christened, baptized there, and it's where my grandmother, went until she didn't, at the end of her life. But it was a very influential time. So that was like the 70s, the mid 70s. Now we're coming up on 50 years since the bicentennial, and we were living right there during the bicentennial. I remember all of that part. But back in those days, the churches were much more full than the mainline churches, we call them now. I didn't know anything about that. I just know, that my cousins went to the Catholic Church, and we went to the Lutheran Church. And my grandmother was a Catholic growing up, and Lutheranism became where she found her tradition of choice, and that's where we were. So for me, I don't know where the beginning starts, but I know...
You were going to, as a child, that your family was going to church, right?
Yeah.
So you started saying at the age of 2. Well, at the age of 2, I guess you're being carted off to church already, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of familiar to you from your whole life long, you might say.
Yeah.
And it resonated with you in some way.
It did, and I don't know where the initial resonance came from, but I think it really had to do with a couple of things. First, the music, that the hymns, the congregational singing, but then also the choir singing, and the kind of hymns that they were. And then I think the second thing was the theater of it all. And I don't mean in terms of the show. I just mean that everything was taken very seriously, and the pastor had a role to play, and the acolytes had their role to play, and they were wearing costumes that were important. To wear these robes, it meant something. And there was a call and response was printed right there in the bulletin, that the minister would say the things in italics, and then in the bold, that would be the response of the congregation. And, we were taught I was taught really young about the ceremony of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So there was, the beginning, the prelude of the organ, and then the choir had a little choir prelude, and then there was a march in, and the pastor had a welcome, and then the first scripture. I mean, it was a program.
Yeah, it was a whole program, and it all made sense. All the things you're describing sort of make sense, don't they? The welcome and even that responsive call and response thing, which is very participatory, the whole congregation engaged in that, and that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a feeling of importance and reverence.
Mm-hmm.
I remember very distinctly there is a painting on the above the altar. So if you're in the congregation and you're looking up the altar, at the very back there was this really big painting, and I can't remember the painter right now, but he portrayed Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's Jesus kind of praying on this rock, and you can see in the background the apostles are sleeping, and there's this beam of light shining right down on Jesus's head. And I didn't know anything about this then, but admittedly, he's very European looking. He looked a lot like me,
right.
Yeah. A lot like the founding fathers' portraits, that kind of thing. But I knew, and I think I've talked about this before, like I knew that wasn't a portrait of Jesus. Like Jesus did not sit for that portrait.
This is not like a photo.
I got that at a very early age. That
it's
wasn't
not an attempt to show what Jesus actually looked like.
Right.
It's showing a scene.
Right.
And the feeling of the scene. It was a very intense scene, right? In Gethsemane.
Yeah.
And so it's showing that sense of the scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just it made me want to take everything really seriously. Mm-hmm. I just felt like that was a work of art that was important, and that's why it was there. And the pastor wore his robes, and the acolyte wore their robes, and we all sang together at a certain thing. Like it all meant something very important. And so that was where we were. And then when I was in fourth grade, we moved into southern New Jersey, only about 45 minutes away, straight east from South Philadelphia there where we were, but a completely different type of situation. We were in, at the time, South Jersey was really, farmland. I mean, the house we built on an acre was, cut out of the forest, the Pinelands forest,
Wow.
Yeah, so it was my mom especially wanted to be in a rural type of situation, and yet close enough to the urban that we could, do things or whatever. But so it was a really ideal type of situation. And during that time, we found the Church of Christ, so a very much more evangelical type of non-denominational situation. And it appealed to my mother specifically because my mother always had this, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Just
okay.
Like, God, what is your plan for my life? She always seemed to be searching so deeply, and Dad too, but specifically Mom. And, if you'll just tell me what to do, I'll do it. But just give me the sign, And so when my brother Dan, I have two younger brothers. My brother Dan is 2 years and almost 3 years younger than me. And then my brother Lee is 4.5 years younger than I am. And my brother Dan, when he was playing baseball in a little league, he was pitching, and the catcher he and the catcher became good friends. His name was Amos Jones. And it turns out that Larry Jones, his father, was the minister at the Church of Christ in Tabernacle, where we lived, Tabernacle, New Jersey. And that's where they were playing baseball. And so the more my mom and Mrs. Jones talked during the games and stuff like that, they got to know each other, and they were, those great people. So they invited our family to church. And so I was the summer of my 7th grade year, I think. And so we started to go there. And then my mom and dad started studying the Bible with Larry Jones and Mrs. Jones, so the pastor and his wife. And I was going to the youth group and things. And what we got was everything that we had been doing with the Lutheran Church and everything else was wrong. And that we had to get right with God.
Yeah.
And that was difficult for my mom because, she was born and raised as a Lutheran, and now that put my grandmother's soul in jeopardy and all the other things. But, what do we do? And it was interesting because this line of, like a saying that used to kind of make me laugh, we'd say, there is no gray area in the Bible. The Bible is in black and white.
Okay. Yes.
All you have to do is open it and see it's in black and white.
It's black and white.
Yeah. And I didn't know, it didn't feel right. But as a middle schooler and 8th grader, I didn't have any ability to really question that yet. And my mother and father, but my mother specifically, who was, tell me what to do. And they say, yeah, well, okay, we have to do A, B, C, D, E. So there it is. And so my mom, okay, well, let's do that. It led to more study. And after the study, the conclusion, which has to be the obvious conclusion, is that you need to be baptized again. And by baptized, we mean immersed fully underneath the water. Like if I don't get all of my body in there, we got to do it again because we got to get all the way under.
Yeah.
And my parents, I was out at a youth group function, and my parents decided on a Sunday night that after a study session that they were going to get baptized. Why delay? I mean, goodness, you could drop dead at any moment, but let's get this done. So they got baptized. So when we got back to the church building with the youth group, and I saw that my parents, had gotten baptized, and it was like all eyes on me.
Okay.
Is this something you want to do? And I said, well, and I had been studying too with the youth group and then private. And yeah, let's do this. Let's do it. Yeah, that feels great. Everybody's here. Here's the family. Let's do it. And so the pastor, actually, I think my dad, my father, baptized me.
Okay.
And when I got up out of the water, I was kind of terrified because I didn't feel any different.
Yeah.
And the problem was, and I realized this is all kind of looking backwards on things and being able to realize things years later. At the time, let's go back to the Lutheran Church. And when I was 7, 8 years old and singing in the children's choir and listening to that music and participating in the ceremony and all of those other things, there was never a question of whether or not God existed.
Right.
And whether or not God was for everyone. I had Jewish friends. You were over here and we're over here, and this is how God comes to me. I mean, obviously as an 8-year-old, I couldn't articulate that, but I know I could tell you God was present in the church. God was present in the forest, in the baseball diamond. Like he was everywhere. Like I just didn't understand a separation. But then when we got to the Church of Christ and there was this, oh, you've been doing it wrong, that really struck me because, okay, well, if I've been doing it wrong, let's do it right then. Well, you have to get baptized. And so when I got baptized and I came up and thought, well, now what?
That's scary. I mean,
yeah.
You're supposed to cross a big line. Before, God had been everywhere, but now it turns out, well, not if you're doing things wrong, so you got to do them right, and that includes this baptism. And so you think, okay, now I'm going to cross the line and move into the true godly realm, but you come out, you feel nothing. And this whole idea of everything's got to be done one way, and that even description of baptism, that it's got to be entire. If you're not totally submerged, you'd have to do it again because it wasn't done right. So you haven't crossed the line into the godly area. And there you are as a still quite young kid.
Yeah, so now here I am in middle school and then going into high school, and the theater started to really take hold. And
you mean the theater of the church?
Well, the theater of my acting, my work.
Oh, your acting. Uh-huh.
Because there was kind of a parallel movement in my life, and that parallel movement, there's sort of two things happening at the same time, where going to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, being with the youth group, doing youth group activities, on the weekend or whatever. And kind of going on this track of how God is and how God works and how God looks and where God isn't and where God is. And then this other sort of side, this other part of the parallel, which was finding God, even though I don't know if I would have said it that way at the time, but finding God in becoming other people. By playing other people.
Were you already in school plays or something, or just in high school?
Well, I had been doing theater since those early days. So around the same time that I'd been singing in the children's choir, I'd also do other things, secular plays and concerts. And I did a lot of singing as a boy soprano as a young person. And so by the time I got to middle school and was doing the school plays and things. By the time I got to high school, I ran with a group of friends who were deeply into theater. We had a really terrific community theater called the Pineland Players, where I lived in South Jersey. And when I was in high school, those of us who were in high school, we formed this junior company. And the junior company, under the auspices of the community theater, we put on our own work, our own shows, and you had to be under 21 in order to have any kind of position, backstage, director, acting, any of it. And, so we had one or two adults from the company who were very influential in our, upbringing in the theater. So it was very fortunate to have that work. But it was always kind of stifled in a way by the morality of the church and the quote unquote immorality of the theater. I mean, this goes back to, the earliest days of theater, obviously, Shakespeare days.
For centuries. I mean, the church condemning the theater because the theater shows all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are kind of, sinful, especially by the standards of a particular church. An actor might be smoking, and smoking might be prohibited. I know in my grandmother's church, dancing was prohibited, for example, so certain kinds of music were kind of sinful, So you had this parallel thing playing off each other, I suppose, but with some tension between them because the theater wasn't quite up to snuff religiously.
Well, I wouldn't say that I never found truth in my at church or in any of the church activities. I did. Good. I found a lot of deep truth there.
Yes.
And the youth pastor particularly was a seeker. We always asked questions. We always could talk. I mean, I had a really wonderful youth group. camp during the summer was a wonderful time. And so I have a lot of really great memories about that time.
Wonderful.
The conflict was that I never felt satisfied with only seeking the answers in our particular faith. Not that I wanted to go to another denomination or another religion, but I was really starting to feel that I was finding deep truth and deep meaning in theatrical experiences. So either as an audience member at a movie that had nothing to do with religion, or it just, but there's a deep truth about this story in here, or there's somebody singing a song and it was conveying something really deep. And then, just the more I started to see of the world, the more I would look into the world, I was still finding truth and meaning and how to be empathetic.
Yes.
And how to, and again, it's not that I was not finding that at church, but I was also finding it in these other experiences. And so the exclusivity of my religious upbringing just it never really made sense to me. I tried to really be that way. I tried to shut the other things out. The way I took a lot of the teaching in was, for example, St. Paul has a lot of military and warrior kind of language in some of his epistles. So put on the breastplate of righteousness, arm yourself with the sword of the Spirit, all that kind of thing. And then the evangelical hymns are onward Christian soldiers marching as to war, right? So there was all of this making sure that I had the right theology so that I could guard against anything else that would take me off of the shore ground of my theological thinking.
Yes.
We have the only way, we have the right way. Isn't that a little bit much? I know it's a burden, and aren't we fortunate? And yet it just never made sense, because I knew people outside of my particular religion that also had a deeply meaningful relationship with God. And I was being told, oh, no, they actually don't. It may look like it, and good people may be good people, but they're not saved. Okay, saved from what? The whole thing. But it never held up. And yet the more I tried to push it away and just be done with it, the more I wanted that authentic relationship with God. I could never say that I didn't believe God existed.
Right.
Now, there was a time when I thought the supernatural theistic God did not exist. That God could be everything, God is everything, God is that I could kind of start to get my head around, but never the supernatural theistic God didn't work. But I couldn't be an atheist. It just didn't make any sense.
Atheist, there's just like nothing.
But that just it's fine even to be nihilistic. I guess okay, but that's not interesting to me. I mean, I started to realize like that doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
You're just this, and then you go to dust, and that's it. And it's okay, well, all right, maybe you don't know that, because here you are telling me that, like whoever you are, right? So you don't know. And if you don't know, and if I don't know, like, who knows? I don't know.
Right. And certain things do seem meaningful and even deep, both in religion and beyond religion. And then that's where you're finding some kind of truth or spiritual insight or life insight. I don't know how you would have put it, but some kind of insight or wisdom or ways to relate to something beyond yourself, maybe would be a way to put it. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think it is. I just couldn't reconcile the fact that other ways of looking at something were not valid. I mean, because that was what I was trying to get at as an actor, and still do, is how can you, I mean, let's explore who this person is. Let's explore this character that I'm playing. I want to know, who are you? And so I look around at different angles. I'll try to say a line a different way. I try to listen to what the other characters are saying to my character. Like, how does that affect how am I really listening to them? Am I not? What am I taking in? You can play a scene, several different ways and try to get at it in a different way. And if you can do that with a character that you're trying to play, I mean, why can't you do that with your own life?
Mm-hmm.
It just never made sense that we have answers, but to the questions we don't have answers for, well, we'll leave that in God's hands. Like, what? It's either all in God's hands or it's not. I mean, where is God that it's not in his hands? Where would God be then? If God's not here, where would God be? I mean,
Right.
those kinds of questions really, well, it's, no, I need to know. I need to know. And I would
Yeah.
ask that, and I couldn't get any answers. But the more I would explore a character, the more I would see a play or see a movie that I would get these, yes, life is like this. Oh, wait, no, it's kind of like that. Oh, and I would have, I'd have these realizations about what life is about, what love is about, what, all of it.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating, Scott, because you were learning as much about the ultimate questions. Religion speaks to these ultimate things. When you talk about love in that context, it's not how to have a successful date. It's a little
Right.
more ultimate than that. And uh, and you're learning as much from theater about that as from religion. You're learning from both. But it sounds like the only problem you've run up to on the religion side, really, well, you've run up against the exclusivism side, that
Mm.
just doesn't seem to put these little boundaries around it when there's so much insight and wisdom available all over the place. And then that sense that, well, God can't be bounded in a little place, And I guess that's why the kind of supernatural uh, big person of God seemed a bit wrong, because that sounded as if God would have to be over somewhere, I guess, higher than the sky or something, rather than all around you. Does that be a way to put it? Or how are you thinking about it at that point as you, kind of emerge from high school into whatever came next?
A lot of what the religious tradition that I grew up in had to do with was not doing things.
Yes.
Try to be as good as you can at not doing things and these certain things. And I think in college, I got pretty caught up in that. Like, why do I desire to do these things? And why is this a constant battle
Yeah.
of making sure that I'm not being seen doing things?
Yeah.
And
There are things you want to do that's, you might say, human nature. And yet there's a big list of do not do this, do not do that, do not even think or feel certain ways. And
yeah,
that's a pretty
instead of
hard thing to do.
it is. What I see looking back and what I was lacking then was the focus on what is it that I want to do, which I now feel is a God directed, God led type of thought process. So you could substitute the words, God, what is your will for my life? What would you like me to do with my life? I didn't have this sense of communicating with God inside me, because at that point, I was told and taught that God was somewhere else. God was out
Yeah.
there and I'm here. The conflict that I had all growing up was, again, going back to that 8-year-old boy. I never had a question that there wasn't me and God. Like, God was me. I was God. And we're clearly separate, but all of the hymns there were hymns like, at the Lutheran church, were hymns like, um, and he walks with me and
Yeah.
he talks with me. This idea of I come to the garden alone and I am with God and we're walking together. I,
Yeah.
I didn't take that in and go, oh, I didn't know it was like that. Now I know it's like that. I always thought it was like that
Yeah.
until I was told, oh, no, 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 that's not what you were doing. I wasn't. No, you have to do this. And then I would do this, baptize, make sure you're good at not doing things, all of that stuff, in order for God to be pleased and come near me. I never got over the fact that God wasn't with me. I just didn't know how to
That sounds
reconcile
like
that.
a bit of torture. Torture in the sense that you've somehow got to pull something off that there's no way to pull off. You've got to achieve something there's no way to do.
Yes,
Or
that's a
you're
great way to
just,
put it.
you know,
That's a great way to put it, to try to pull something off that you're just not going to be able to pull off. I did feel that way a lot, I think. Yeah.
well, at some point, were you able to move beyond that impossible dilemma, you might say?
I went to Northeastern Christian Junior College in Villanova, Pennsylvania, for my first 2 years of undergrad. And after that program was over, you had to transfer to a 4-year college somewhere. And that college was affiliated with the Church of Christ. So it was a beautiful experience. It was a very small school, got a lot of attention in certain areas of academic study and otherwise. And so I was really pleased with the education, lifelong friends that I still keep in contact with. But after that program, after an associate's degree, I needed to transfer. And it was a question of which Church of Christ school do I go to? Do I go to Harding University in Arkansas? Do I go to Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas? And there were only a handful of them. And a lot of my friends were going to Oklahoma Christian University in Oklahoma City. Actually, it was Oklahoma Christian College at the time. And for some reason, I felt like I can't just go where all of my friends are going. I should go somewhere else. And so I went to Abilene Christian University. Had a really nice theater program. I thought this will be terrific. It's just what I need. But I only knew one person there when I got there. And it was so overwhelming. And I stayed there for 2.5 weeks. And I told my parents, I have to come home. I can't stay.
That sounds horrible.
It was horrible.
Yeah,
and
big
then,
university in a strange state. You don't know anybody except
West Texas.
One poor person.
Wow, I know it was a bad time for me.
Yeah,
and I could not do it. So my parents brought me home, and I worked the rest of that semester and went to Oklahoma Christian in the spring. I was like, this is where I should have gone in the first place, whatever. And I went there, and it was wonderful. I had that spring semester, and it was terrific. And then came home and worked, and then that next fall, the fall of 1989, my first wife, Melissa, came to school, and I met her.
Okay.
And I remember this experience. We met in the fall and talked a time or two, and then we were at this Christmas banquet in early December, and I was with another date. I took this girl, and she was with a friend of mine as his date, but they were just there together, no big deal. And I saw her across the ballroom. It's almost like a movie, but I saw she was over there.
Strange.
And she turned to me, and I caught her eye, and we locked eyes for a minute, probably just a couple of seconds, right? But it felt like forever. But in that moment, I heard this voice say to me, "That's the girl you're going to marry." And I said, "No, it's not." Not because I didn't want to marry her or whatever. I met her a couple of times, but because I already had these plans that I was going to graduate school, move to New York, become an actor. It was just, this was not in the plans.
Right.
But after that, it was maybe a day or two later, we went away for Christmas break, and I was in New Jersey, and she's from Oklahoma. And she was from Shawnee, Oklahoma, went to Shawnee High School. But I lived in New Jersey, and the high school that I went to was called Shawnee High School.
Oh my God. No, there's sometimes
named after
you just
these.
got to connect the dots,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's hard to believe all this kind of magic, and yet here it is. Here it is, and maybe better just to go with it. Think, this is telling me something.
Yeah. And so I called her on the phone, and this was, back in those days where you had the long cord on the phone and kind of had to go downstairs to get some privacy or whatever. I called her. And then the next semester when I came back in the spring, we started to date. And in 1992, we got married.
Wow.
I went to graduate school. And right after I finished graduate school, that last semester actually went from 93 to 95 to Oklahoma City University. And my last semester, Melissa got pregnant with Michaela, our daughter. And so in 1995, again, another thing that was not supposed to happen, quote unquote, we were supposed to move to New York. Well, no. So then we had Michaela, and I decided to stay in Oklahoma and teach, and Melissa taught as well. 4 years later, we had Connor. And then back up here, we moved up here to the Philadelphia, New Jersey area where my parents still in the same church where I grew up in, and all of that. And
that worked for your wife as well. She was not against moving out of Oklahoma?
No, we felt like that would be the best thing to do.
Okay.
And also, it was time for me to pursue my theater career in a more broad way. Broadway in quotes, but also a more broad way.
Yeah, the East. You were in the East Coast, much nearer a lot of active theater,
especially then in the 90s, because they didn't have the kind of theater scene that we have now around the country, which owes a lot to social media and a lot to the internet and all of that as it developed over time. But this was going to be the place where, if I was going to make a living in the theater, that this would be the place where we would do it.
Yeah. And what was your spiritual life at that point? Then you come east. So whatever you were doing in Oklahoma, you're now breaking those connections by moving east back to where you used to be. And did you pick up the thread of the Church of Christ near that you had been going to, or did you take some new turn, or what?
Several years before we moved up here, we were in a much more progressive Church of Christ. My wife, Melissa, and I were. That's where we had our children and raised our kids, or in the early days, at the Dayspring Church of Christ in Edmond. And a lot of college professors from the area, and there were a lot of young people our age too, who were having similar thoughts about theology, and with a more progressive movement toward looking at other traditions and seeing what they offered, while at the same time tending to the traditions of our particular faith and recognizing them as such, that these are the traditions of our faith, not the only way to do a thing. It's the way that we have done things. And so acknowledging that, so singing a cappella, for example, that if you wanted to have an instrument at a particular service or whatever, sure, do it. It's not forbidden. But the tradition of singing with shape notes and singing a cappella is a beautiful one. So let's hang on to that. You know what I mean? That kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so by the time we moved up here, we'd already had a much more progressive um, theology and theological experience, not only in our church going life, but then also the books that we would read and the lectures that we would listen to and the different perspectives that we could seek. So when we got here, we lived with my parents for 2 years while we kind of got some things sorted out, and Melissa got a teaching job and I was working on some other things. And then we moved from Tabernacle, in my childhood growing up home, to the Princeton area, to Plainsboro, which is, central New Jersey. And when we were there, we went to the Princeton United Methodist Church. And that's where our children were raised. Really, my son Connor, like pre-kindergarten, I guess we were there. And then that would have been third grade, I think, for Michaela, my daughter. So they kind of went their whole lives in the Methodist tradition. And the Methodist tradition had a couple of things that were really good. And that particular church did, the Princeton United Methodist, had the hymns and the robes and the choir and the organ and the almost Lutheran kind of sensibility that I found so much comfort in as a child. And also had a very do as much good as you can, as often as you can motto of John Wesley. So we were able to raise our children in a situation where they were getting what we thought was a well-rounded theological education, but also service-driven Methodist background.
And between that time and where, I don't know, in your life timeline, are we sort of close to when I first got to know you, when you first discovered God and Autobiography, or what happened in that transition time between the Methodist Church, which sounds, your spiritual story so far sounds like a story of progress to me, because you developed a very mature, even within the Church of Christ, evangelical and somewhat literal, and boundary drawing. You developed a very mature attitude to that and found a congregation where you said, well, it's more like this is our way than this is the only way and the rest of you are going to hell, kind of attitude. But okay, the others are interesting too, and may have something to offer for someone. Now the Methodist Church sounds like one that's meeting your needs and those of your family very well. And but so I'm wondering, well, okay, how did you go from that? What further twists and turns did you take maybe on the way to our encounter?
Well, there's a lot of twists and turns,
and
a lot of things.
There might be
a lot of twists and turns, but we haven't talked about. I think we have on some other What's on Our Minds or something maybe, but in 1999 I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Oh.
And that, I don't know where it started, how it started. I have, some ideas about, I know in high school there was a difficult phase of time. I do know that when I was talking about Abilene Christian and I was there for 2.5 weeks and had to come home, that was a really difficult time, a breakdown, quote unquote, you could say. But it was always God is moody. One day he's the life of the party, and very next day he's sitting in the corner. What's that about? A lot of things. And was very fortunate to be able to be diagnosed in 1999. And some of the fallout from the poor decisions made during that time, particularly, 1999, 2000, 2001, in that area, Melissa, my wife, and I decided it was best to move up here and start my career, start a new life, come up here. And so we were kind of leaving behind an old life where there was some really difficult challenges in our marriage and give it another go. And so, we moved back up here, and I was in the theater, like I said, and starting to kick my career up. And in 2003, in the spring, I was doing Evita, a musical at the Walnut Street Theater. And my daughter, who was 8 at the time, came and sat on my lap on a day off and started crying. We don't see you enough. I was like, okay, that's it. I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna be away from my kids.
Oh, the problem is in the theater. You're going off to the theater.
I'm just all the time. I'm
every
gone.
night, I suppose.
Yeah.
And,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes
so I decided,
out of town, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I decided to go into teaching. My wife, Melissa, at the time was a teacher in in East Brunswick. And I found a job as an elementary school teacher teaching music. First in Elizabeth for 4 years in the 2000s, 2004 to 2008. And then, excuse me, then I took a job as a humanities teacher at East Brunswick High School. And I was there for 3 years. So from 2009 school year to the 2010-2011 school year. So 3 school years. And I taught the seniors. I taught a humanities course, team taught with 2 other teachers, and it was terrific. I got along with them really well. We wrote the curriculum. I thought that I would still be there to this day.
Uh-huh.
I thought, okay, my career.
This is it. You made a commitment.
Both of my parents were public school teachers their whole career. We had a wonderful life growing up.
Mm-hmm.
They were off when we were off for vacations, all that stuff. So it worked for us, raising our kids. And then after the 2011 school year, East Brunswick Board of Education did not pass their school budget. So the non-tenured teachers, including me, got riffed, which is reduction in force. Nothing personal. It's nothing personal.
Right.
It's just you become a line item on a budget. And all of my evaluations from the assistant superintendent were glowing. My colleagues, all of them thought it was terrific. My students, we were having a wonderful time. And now I'm a line item on a budget.
Oh.
And luckily was doing a play and just a community theater play that semester. And my daughter, when I found out that I wasn't, she came to me and said, you need to get back in the theater. Okay, so it was like this sort of, she's the one who said, we don't see you. But now she was 16 and she was, this is what you do.
She could see it, right? She could see it.
And, I talked to my wife and, we did.
Yeah.
And so we did it. I did it. And I went back into the theater. And so we were going to the Methodist church. But there were more poor decisions. And those poor decisions cost me my marriage.
Oh.
And my family. Oh. And this was in 2013, 2014. And then Melissa and I got divorced in the spring of 2014. Spring of 2015. And then at Christmas time of 2015, I did A Christmas Story, the musical, at the Walnut. And so from there till this Christmas, just now, where I closed A Christmas Story at the Walnut. So 10 years later, they did it again, and here I am. So in those 10 years was a lot of change, a lot of God working on me, showing me things, pointing stuff out that at the beginning of this 10-year stretch, I really struggled with, because I really had this feeling that God was, if God exists, which I don't even know what I meant by that. I didn't think the supernatural theistic God did not exist. However, there was something that I didn't want to give up on, but I didn't know how to articulate it. I was reading a lot of books. Marcus Borg was a big thinker that I turned to. And I
With a
just,
different understanding of Christianity, right?
with a different understanding of Christianity
Yeah.
and a different way of looking at God,
Yes.
what the word God refers to.
Yeah.
And then from there, started finding, and this was really had a lot to do with YouTube and algorithm. I don't believe that God is the algorithm. At the same time, I feel like there was a look at this, as opposed
Hmm.
to not that, but look at this. And so finding spiritual teachers that admittedly sounded like people that I wanted to sound like or thought had authority. So Alan Watts with his
Yes.
English voice, and it was a track. So then, and then Ram Dass, and then Thich Nhat Hanh, a
Yes.
Buddhist monk whose life was extremely interesting, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King for his activism against the Vietnam War and all kinds of other things. So he was a personality that was really interesting to me, and then just starting to open up to those things. And all along, really starting to pick up my theater career. I was doing a lot more work and finding a lot more about myself and learning more about myself by some of the characters that I was playing. Just empathy for somebody who could look at something this way. Just juggling that. And then when the pandemic happened, and this is a story that
Oh,
many have heard before, just
yes.
before the pandemic happened, I had a lot of work lined up. I had done some ghost writing before, and I was thinking, hey, maybe I can do some ghost writing or something along with this theater work that I'm going to do. And that's when I found your advertisement in Craigslist, and you were looking for somebody who could promote your book on, or the ideas on social media and things. And I'd done some social media work, so I was like, let's see what this is. Two retired philosophy professors, let's work with them. And then it just felt like something to pursue. And then we met, and you told me what the book was about and what your experience was like. And I paid attention to myself. And what I found was I wasn't going, this is crazy, let me get out of here. I didn't think that. I just thought,
Right.
okay, tell me more. And okay, let's do this. And I took the job. And then we decided, about the podcast, and let's make it into a podcast and all of that. And I started to think, before we really got started on the making of the podcast and in the early scripts, I started to think, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, is he telling the truth? Is he not? I mean,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, did this happen or didn't it? And I got a really distinct feeling. I can't call it a voice. But whatever a voice compels from you on the inside, whatever that was, the compulsion was, look at this as an actor. When I look at a situation that I'm going to act in, I don't say, is this true or is it not true? Or could it happen? I say, what if it is true? And then I act as if it were true. That's what acting is. You act
Yes.
as
Yes.
if, yeah. And so, and I thought, well, what if what he's saying is not true? Well, then it's going to turn out to be not true, and then this will all be over. But what if it is true? And
Yeah.
once I locked into what if it is true, and I started to act as if it were, I never had the question again. I have never had the question again.
Yeah.
And I honestly, no one has ever asked it of me. No one has ever asked me. And I've been waiting for it, Jerry. Nobody has ever asked me, do you think he's telling the truth? Nobody's asked it.
That's amazing. The one thing I do know, whether it's the voice of God, people can be mistaken, and I can be mistaken, but I know I'm telling the truth in the sense this is exactly what happened. God in Autobiography is very nearly a transcript. At first, when I showed that draft to Abigail, she said it was too much of a transcript. She said, honey, the readers aren't hearing God. You need to put yourself in because you're the connector for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, oh, where was I? And, started putting in that situational facts and how did I react? And then people wanted to know, how did Abigail react? But when I hear your story, Scott, if we go back a little, back somewhere around or just before we got to Marcus Borg, it just sounded to me as if God had become your partner in this search in a very strong sense of partner. God was just working right with you by your side and directs you to all these things, or opens your heart to them, your heart and mind to all of these things that you, Ram Dass and whatever, and then somehow is playing a role. I always take it as one testament that I'm probably telling the truth and probably is God, precisely because God gets people like you with your intense religious experience. I didn't have that. I was an agnostic. You have an intense religious sensibility that you bring to this. And I think, thank the Lord, because we need that in this kind of podcast. But anyway, I just see that as one sign, as God is working with Scott, that God brings Scott to this project. Okay, good. And anyway, that's just my own sense of it. And I know one thing you've said, I don't know what you want to say next, but one thing we should get to is that about that time, in fact, that I first met you, I think you told me that you had given up God for Lent.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now praying to love.
Mm.
And we've talked about that. It's come up, but I always felt I tend to go off and say my own blah, blah, blah about love. But I felt that I didn't really draw out of you what that meant to you. What are the implications of praying not to God, but to love, if I put it right.
That's right. And I think it had to do with a couple of things. The one was that, again, I just couldn't accept anymore this idea of a supernatural theistic God out there somewhere away from me. And having gotten to where I am now. So at that time, I was still in that idea. And part of that was also because God, the letters G-O-D, just didn't mean anything to me anymore, because everyone was asking about a God that I didn't believe in.
Right.
What they were referencing when they used the word God was not something that I was interested in. But love was something that I was really interested in. And in the scriptures, is it James who says God is love?
Yeah, I think Book of John.
Is it? Okay, Book of John.
I don't
God
know,
is,
unless he's quoting somebody, but I think
no.
the actual Gospel of John, because I looked it up recently. It's always seemed puzzling to me. I'm too much a logician. God is love rather than God loves. I've just kind of puzzled over that. It's sort of an abstract noun in that context, or something. I don't know what, but what does it mean when the gospel says it, or when you say it? What does it add? I believe God loves us, but this statement seems to be kind of ratchets that up in some way that I don't well understand. God is love.
It was born out of the newer experience of that God is everything, that all there is God. Marcus Borg's writing introduced me to panentheism,
yes,
which is everything is in God. So this idea that everything exists, all there is God. All there is isness is God. And so I started to think, instead of God is nowhere, God is nothing, no thing.
You've written a book by that name, which I can recommend to our listeners. God is no thing.
No thing. What if you flip that around? Because you can always look at something an opposite way. Well, what if God were everything?
Yes.
And what is the greatest of all of these things? The scriptures teach us the greatest of these is love. And so I wasn't using it in an abstract way, but just in a way that would be all inclusive.
Uh-huh.
So if I were to say, love be with you, that has no denominational, no religious implications of anything. I'm not asking you to join. I'm not just love be with you. I'm wishing you all the best. And I imagine that that's what I mean when I say God be with you. I'm meaning that same thing. So why not just leave out the tricky theological thing and just say what I really mean, which is love? I think that's where it started. But the more I did it, the more inclusive my thoughts about what God could be became, just by just saying love all the time instead of, because I was coming from this very specific way of seeing God. And the thing about our podcast that was very significant was when we were doing the first 44 episodes, which was where I was playing you and you were, in a sense, playing God. I mean, those are the roles we played in this dramatic adaptation of what actually happened. And you were always very conscientious about really trying to portray God as it happened, as you had heard it. I want to try to convey that.
Yeah, I get in the mode of how it was to hear God, and then I would try to just sort of say it that way, the God side.
And the way the process happened was you would record your answers, sometimes questions or but just your lines, and send them to me. And then I would hear that audio that you had sent me, and I would have to put my lines in there. And my lines were often either the narrator, which is your story, or specifically this conversation with God playing Jerry. So I had to think about the inflections of how I would say a line or a question to God, or how it would fit inside of what you had given me. And doing that, I felt like I finally started to be able to navigate this duality inside of me that we all have.
Yeah.
When I say, I'm going to work on myself, there's an I that's going to do the work and the myself that's getting worked on. That's a whole other thing we can talk about. But the idea is that we all recognize that duality. And in working on the specific project of having this dialogue with you, or having this dialogue with God, inside of me, there was this, no, that's not it. Okay, I'll try it again another way. And I would do no, that's it. I would have this sense of that's it. And okay. And I would listen to it back. And I had the ability to listen as an audience member. Now, don't get me wrong. I can still watch myself and hear myself and really critique myself. I absolutely do not think I'm perfect in any way.
Right.
I do, however, feel like I have been given, and it was through this process of these episodes, this ability now to hear myself as an audience member, as a third party, and be able to have this conversation almost with what I call God, what I think is God, saying, this is it.
This is it.
Or this isn't right, or this is right. And I still, even in the episodes that I edit today, which are, you and Abigail, or you and I doing this right now, or what's on our mind, I sit down and I edit it out. I still have that dialogue. Oh, this feels good. This doesn't. But it's carried out into my life. It's carried into my relationship with my work as an actor, where I'm like, is this the way I should say a line? I get, and then into my actual life of, should I say this to Sarah, my wife?
Yes.
Or should I not? Or this person said this to me. Ooh, I'm offended. Oh, are you offended? Why? Why are you offended? Right. I have this conversation, which I know is more than just, he's talking to himself again.
Right. Now
you
that's
know?
interesting. That's evolution that, as I say, I felt went back to Marcus Borg or before, where we saw increasingly God being your partner, leading you along, and then leading you as perhaps to respond to my little ad for social media. And then you came up with the idea, hey, this is kind of dramatic, and thought of doing a play, or even better, let's do a whole podcast, kind of dramatically reenacting the what happened. And now, and so you're entering into it there with a little God prompt when you got it right. And now that's carried into, well, your life as a whole. And that is what it is, I guess, in my view, based on my experience, and now as well as educated by your experience, that is how God works with people. It can work with people even if they don't think, even if they're atheist and never recognize that there's a God partner present. God can do all these things because God is, as you say, also everywhere, but available to all of us all the time. But here you're enacting that. And here in this, hearing your story, we, you might say, see it happening before our eyes as you tell the story. Is this a place to end, or is there more that we should say about your journey? I mean, your journey didn't end yesterday. So,
Well, one thing I do want to mention, we can close with
yes.
this, is if to go back to Marcus Borg, that is something very significant, because when we were still living in Oklahoma City and going to the Dayspring Church of Christ, that was the first time, and during that time is when I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, as I said, in 1999 into 2000. And in 2000, I spent some time in the hospital. And while I was in the hospital, one of the members of the congregation where we were going gave me the book Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, which was the first Marcus Borg book that I ever read. And then I've since read all of his things. But
isn't that a great title? Meeting Jesus Again for the first time.
For the first time. It's a beautiful book, and it was very challenging. It really challenged my everything. I was not ready for it, and I came back to it a little while later. I had to look at it again another time after some time had passed. But I come back to Borg because what I found through Marcus Borg is God is an experiential reality.
Mm-hmm.
That God is found in the experiences. And so we've talked before, like on What's on Our Mind, about the new atheists, about, Sam Harris and others who, for whom God is non-existent. And I just find that it's, especially with you and having been with you for this long, but encountering you at first, your experience, it counts for so much. I mean, you say, when you just said it earlier, whether it's true or not, this is what happened.
Yeah,
I'm just relating
what happened.
I'm relating what happened.
Yes.
If I tell you that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and I spent some time in the hospital, that's what happened.
That's what happened. Yeah.
And you're saying God talked to me and told me these things. It's the same thing. Yeah. And so I really started to understand more and more about experiences and started to look back on my experiences and be able to track the things that you just mentioned, especially along the way of these last 10 years of looking back and seeing this point in my life, this road that I took this way instead of taking that way. Like, do you remember the nudge you got? Do you remember the nudge that you got that you ignored? And how that turned out?
Right, right.
And all of it, it's so based in my experience.
Yes.
And I think being able to pay attention more to experiences, not only of our own, but experiences of others, is the only way to really get close to the God that we know.
How in general do we know anything about reality? It's because we experience it. That's how I know about, that we're doing a podcast now, because I experience it. And God is the same way, and love is the same way. And your sense that, that would be a wrong thing to do, or that's a beautiful piece of music. You know these by experience. And the reductionists, the atheists, wipe out the whole level of meaning, and it's just bare factuality. But that's not what you experience. You don't experience bare factuality. You experience moments of the divine, moments of beauty, moments of love, moments of obligation, of service. That's your full experience. And why not trust it? Why not go with it? And at least see what happens. And that's what you've done. Well, thank you, Scott. And this was a wonderful story to tell. And I think it'd be valuable for anybody who tunes in to hear Scott Langdon's story. And
thank you, Jerry.
A blessing to us all.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.